You are sitting in the car, engine off. You've been parked in your own driveway for 11 minutes. Not because anything is wrong. Nothing is wrong. That's almost the problem. The house is the one you picked. The neighborhood is the one you saved for. Inside, there's a kitchen you renovated and a couch you spent 3 weekends choosing, and a life that, on paper, is exactly what you said you wanted when you were 22 and hungry, and certain that getting here would feel different than this. You don't go inside yet. You sit there, and you look at the front door, and there's this quiet thing happening in your chest. Not grief, not regret, not quite emptiness. More like standing in a room and realizing the furniture is all wrong, even though you chose every piece. More like arriving somewhere after a very long trip and noticing you don't feel the relief you expected. You built this. That's not in question. You made real decisions, real sacrifices. The life in front of you is yours. You just don't know how to walk into it anymore.
There was a version of you, not that long ago actually, who had a very clear picture of what the future looked like. Not clear in detail, clear in feeling. You knew what it would feel like to not worry about the rent. You knew what it would feel like to say yes to things without checking your bank account first. You knew what it would feel like to have built something, a career, a business, a body of work, a reputation that meant something. And you wanted it, not in a passive way, in the way where it keeps you up at night, in the way where you're doing the math in your head while everyone else is just watching the movie. You were optimizing. That's the honest word for it. Every decision was a variable. Where to live, not just for quality of life, but for proximity to opportunity. Who to spend time with, not calculated exactly, but you noticed when people were costing you energy you couldn't afford to spend. How to use your hours, what to say yes to, what to quietly let go. You believed, with the kind of certainty you can only have when you haven't been tested yet, that there was a version of your life on the other side of enough effort. A version where you wouldn't feel this low-grade anxiety anymore, where you wouldn't feel behind, where you would wake up and the first thought wouldn't be what you had to do, but instead something quieter, something that felt like peace. You weren't chasing money. That's what you told yourself, and it was mostly true. You were chasing the feeling you believed money produced, safety, options, the ability to stop white-knuckling everything. You were going to get there, and when you did, everything was going to make sense. And then, slowly, in the way that real things happen, not in montages, not in moments, but across hundreds of ordinary Tuesdays, you got there. Not all at once. First it was one threshold crossed, then another. Income that used to feel like a fantasy started feeling like a floor. You moved. Then you moved again. The apartment gave way to something with more light. The cheap flights gave way to slightly less cheap flights. Small things, but you noticed them. You were supposed to notice them. They were evidence. People started treating you differently. Not dramatically, just you'd say something in a meeting and there'd be a pause before anyone disagreed. You'd mention something you were working on and people would lean in slightly. You started to understand that status is mostly invisible until you have a little bit of it, and then you see it everywhere, like a frequency you couldn't previously hear. And the work got more serious. Not harder, exactly, more serious. The stakes got real. What you were building had weight behind it now. There were people depending on you, systems relying on you, a reputation that preceded you into rooms before you arrived. You liked that. You had wanted that. You'd earned that. But here's what happened alongside it, quietly, in the background. the way water moves through stone. The friendships from before started requiring more effort to maintain, not because anyone did anything wrong, just your lives had diverged. You were keeping different hours, thinking about different problems, living inside a different set of pressures. Conversations that used to feel easy started needing setup. You'd hang up the phone and feel fond of someone and also far away from them, like looking at a photograph of a place you used to live. The hunger started to change shape. Early on, it was sharp. It had direction. You knew exactly what you wanted, and not having it was a clean, motivating pain. But as you acquired the things you'd pointed at, the hunger didn't disappear. It relocated. It found new objects. You started wanting the next thing before you'd finished absorbing the current thing, and you told yourself that was ambition, and it probably was, but it meant you were never quite where you were, always slightly ahead of your own life. You got better at saying no. This felt like growth for a long time, and it was, partly. You stopped wasting time on things that didn't matter. But somewhere in learning to protect your time, you also got harder to reach, not just on the calendar, in yourself. There was a softness you used to have, a willingness to be available, to be interrupted, to let life be a little messy and unscheduled, and it had been slowly engineered out of you in the name of optimization. You didn't notice it leaving. You were too busy. And the feeling you were chasing, that peace, that finally, that arrival, kept being located just past wherever you were. You crossed one threshold and found another. You assumed this was how it worked. You assumed that was fine.
And then you got the thing, the actual thing, or close enough to it that you couldn't really argue you hadn't. Maybe it was the number in the account. Maybe it was the title, the exit, the recognition, the apartment you'd held in your mind like a private religion for years. Whatever it was, you got it. And for a moment, maybe a few days, maybe a week, it felt like something. And then it just became your life. That's the part nobody tells you about, not in a way that sticks. People say it. You've probably heard some version of the goalpost moves or success doesn't make you happy, but hearing it and living it are completely different events. Because when you hear it, you think you understand it, and you privately believe you'll be the exception, that when you get your specific thing, it will work the way you imagined, because your thing is real, and the people who weren't satisfied were probably chasing the wrong things. But there you were, on the other side of what you wanted. And the anxiety didn't leave. It just changed its subject matter. It stopped being about whether you'd make it and started being about whether you could keep it, grow it, be worthy of it. The fear didn't go away. It got more sophisticated. And you looked around at the life you'd built, the actual physical and professional and social architecture of your existence, and realized it had been constructed almost entirely by the person you were trying to become, not the person you actually were. Every choice had been made in service of a future self. The apartment was what that person would live in. The social circle was what that person would maintain. The habits, the morning routine, the way you talked about what you did, all of it was costuming for a role you'd spent years auditioning for. And now you had the part. And you were standing in the wings, wondering why you still felt like yourself. There was a conversation, maybe you remember one like it, where someone who knew you years ago asked how you were doing, and you said, "Good, really good, things are really coming together," and you meant it, you weren't lying. But there was this strange doubling sensation, where you could hear yourself saying the words and also hear the silence underneath them. And the silence contained something that the words didn't. Not sadness, not regret, just a question. A question you didn't have language for yet. Something like, is this it? And if it is, why does it feel like a waiting room?
Here's what actually happened. And this is the part that takes a long time to see clearly. You did the work. You crossed the distance. The version of you that wanted the life and the version of you that built it, those are both real, both yours. But the life you built was designed by someone under pressure. Every choice, every optimization, everything you said yes to and no to, it was made by someone who was trying to prove something. To themselves, mostly, sometimes to other people. But there was always an audience, even if it was just you, watching yourself, checking yourself against a rubric of what enough looked like. And that person, the one doing the building, made very good decisions. Efficient decisions, strategic decisions. But they made them all while trying to get somewhere, and somewhere is not a place you can live. You can only pass through it, briefly, before it becomes here. And here is just ordinary life. Here is the driveway. Here is the house you chose. Here is the person you became while you were becoming someone else. The thing is, identity doesn't update automatically. You can change your income, your address, your title, your habits, and still be operating underneath all of it from the original anxious premise that made you build in the first place. Still trying to prove you're enough, still one crisis away from the feeling that the floor might drop, still slightly unable to trust that any of it is real, that you've actually arrived, that you're allowed to stop performing now. And the life you built, however good it looks from outside, however much you genuinely wanted it, reflects the person who was afraid, not the person that might exist without the fear. It's a monument to your hunger, and you live in it now. That's not a tragedy, it's just the thing that happened. You cannot build a life from striving and then be surprised that the life you built is full of the architecture of striving. You cannot spend years becoming efficient, self-contained, forward-facing, and then unlock softness like it was just waiting in a drawer. The person who needed to build the life and the person who might actually enjoy living it are not always the same person. That gap is not a failure, it's just a cost, one that doesn't show up on any ledger until after. The engine is still off. The house is right there. At some point you'll go inside and you'll do the ordinary things, and the feeling will either fade or it won't. But there's a small, uncomfortable possibility sitting with you in the car right now, that the life you're about to walk into was built for someone who no longer lives there.